Thank you very much. Thank you everybody who's joined this conversation today. Really glad to participate in these conversations with the Indus University. You guys are doing a great job. Yes, I'm here to discuss my book, Land of the Gods, the story of Haryana. The book is published by Rupa Publications, and the foreword of the book is written by my mentor and a friend now, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who's best-selling books have made marks, have made a mark all over, and in fact has been a guiding light for many of us who are, the young historians and people who are trying to make a change, or in the academic circles. Like you said, I have traveled the region quite a bit, Haryana, and the region that I call my motherland, the region where I've invested good amount of my life in. In fact, I remember a decade ago, much like many other people, after you graduate, there's an option of shifting abroad, or there's an option of doing your higher studies abroad and probably make a better life out there. However, that when that question came across me, I was sort of clear in my head that I wanted to work on and work about and work for Haryana. That is how it has been, and here we are. The book Land of the Gods, the story of Haryana, is the documentation of Haryana from 17th to the 21st century. The book essentially starts in the second half of Aurangzeb's tenure, the Mughal emperor, and from there it rushes swiftly to the 21st century. The book is divided. The book is divided into 8 chapters, and it's close to 300 pages. The book is divided into 8 chapters. The first chapter begins, and rightly so, it's called Jats, Sardars and Nawabs. Essentially, the same question bothered me when I had begun writing the book, that when I'm telling anybody the story of Haryana, should I be telling the story of Haryana from the ancient, history of Haryana, or should I be touching a time phase which is probably medieval, modern, or even contemporary? What had happened, of course, is that because, and there's an understanding that unless we appreciate our history, unless we appreciate how or where we've come from, writing about or understanding the modern or the contemporary times would actually be incomplete, or rather, it'll end up a faulty understanding. Hence, it was important for me to touch older Haryana as well, or what this region was about. And the motivation to do all of this also came in from the fact that there existed so many stereotypes about different, the different parts within Haryana, and Haryana as a state as well. For instance, I remember many a times when I was in college, I have heard many, stereotypical, condescending remarks about the region, or much like what they'll say about Jats or people or Haryanvis in general. And I studied in Delhi, and I think that problem was faced by many like me. And of course, a correction had to be made. And in order to do that, I thought the one way that I could contribute and do something about it is to write a book. So here I have Land of the Gods, the story of Haryana. Much like everywhere else, if either of you or anybody listening is a budding writer, this question always comes across as to, when you're writing a book, what is the time span that you want to cover? Because what you want to do as a writer, you want to essentially ensure that the storyline, you stick to the storyline, and your storyline seems seamless. And if you try to cover a lot of time span, you will have to cut down on a lot of information or nuance. You'll have to be a little more generalistic because you want to ensure that there's a pacey story. This can be said or written, either it becomes a very bulky book if you want to justify the story. If you don't want to make it a bulky book, you'll have to write it very simply and generalistic, and which is possible for topics which are very popular. For instance, if I want to write about Haryana, India, I can actually divide Indian history broadly into ancient, medieval, and modern. And even in ancient, medieval, and modern, we do have some inflection points which are commonly known by Indians or the readers. For instance, I can talk about Mahabharata, I can talk about Ramayana, I can talk about the Buddhist era, I can talk about the Gupta empires, and so on and so forth. I can talk about the Ganga plains, Magad, and so on and so forth. These are common inflection points that people who or people can possibly relate to, and there are many motifs of that history that we have imbibed in our culture so much that it's very well present all around us. uh, for instance, the Ashok Chakra, or the national emblem, those are motifs that people can easily relate to, and those motifs are not recent, they're ancient Indian motifs. So those motifs people can essentially relate to. However, when I have to tell a story about Haryana that not many people know about, it was important and rightly suggested by many people that I cut down on the time span that I'm trying to cover. And hence, uh, I decided that I will shift, the entire story that I'm trying to build to from 70 to 21st century. However, this must be clear that it's not that I have not spoken or written about ancient Haryana in the book, or it should not be considered that I have not told you the story about what was happening in medieval Haryana. I have. However, how I do it is that I write the entire story of Haryana. I and in different chapters, I relate it. I relate different instances, different anecdotes, different episodes which are in a different time span. For example, in the book, I do talk about Kurukshetra, and when I'm talking about Kurukshetra, I do tell you the story about Thanesar. I do tell you about the story of the temple destruction that happened in Thanesar. I do tell you about how or what was the religious value of Thanesar, not just today, but for thousands of years now. Hence, the idea was to restrict myself in timeline. But even in that timeline, I ensure that I tell you stories about what was happening in Haryana, which makes Haryana the land of gods. Another important aspect that I touched upon in the book, and where the broad idea is, in fact, I have faced this question multiple times now. That is, how did I work on the title of the book, Land of the Gods? Well, you see, the title of the book, Land of the Gods, is actually a broad translation of the word Haryana. Haryana, if you divide the word Hari plus Ayan, there are many other names given to this region of land, which is between Delhi and Punjab area. Bahudhanyak is one, Kurukshetra or Dharmkshetra Kurukshetra is another. Haryana is a modern name, and Haryana is being used. And it's not true that there are people who think that Haryana is a product of division of Punjab that happened in 1966. All of that I will take up during the course of discussion today. But Haryana is an old name, and there are written epigraphs which talk about how Delhi is a prosperous city or prosperous district of a very prosperous state called Haryana. Haryana, the word then, if you divide it's Hari plus Ayan, Ayan means abode or home, and Hari is Lord Krishna. So Hari, Ayan, and Hari I can broadly translate into God as well. So that is how the home of Hari, or the land of Hari, or the land of the gods. That is how the book is titled Land of the Gods. But not just this, not just with the name. Second thing comes together is that Haryana actually is the home of the Indic civilization. And no, I do not want to pick fights with, historians or traditionalists who want to say that the entire country, because our nation actually is a land of gods. It's a sacred geography, as Dynaic writes in a book. There's religiosity, there is dharma spread across this entire expanse of land. But Haryana is the place where the oldest civilization of the world, that is the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, and consequently the continuing civilization that Bharat is, originated from. Let me take back, say, in the last century, the Harappan civilization became very popular. The word Harappa, the word Indus civilization became popular across the world. Why was it called Harappan civilization? Is because Harappa was the first site, first mound to be found. The biggest mound then to be found on the banks of Indus River was Mohenjo-daro. However, recent discoveries we found that there are bigger mounds of that very civilization and of the same time span that were found in the region that makes modern Haryana. So, for instance, in Hisar, Fatehbad area, there is a mound in a village called Rakhigadi. Rakhigadi has been touted as the biggest mound of the Indus Valley civilization. And as many historians, and I'm not going to go further deep into it, but Sanjeev Sanyal and there are many other historians who've written about it very passionately, that the right word to call it would be Sindhu Saraswati civilization, and I endorse that view. Because one, factually, the Saraswati River flowed through these lands, and two, the biggest mounds of the civilization that makes Sindhu Saraswati civilization were found on this patch of land or this region. Not just Rakhigadi, we have other sites also, and it was on this land that the battle of good versus evil, the biggest battle that has given inspiration, knowledge, direction, and become, made a foundation for our civilization. Mahabharata was fought. It was on this land that Lord Krishna gave his sermon of Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, and that site still is preserved in Kurukshetra. It is a place called Jyotisar, and there's a large bargat tree under which it is believed that Lord Krishna gave his Bhagavad Gita sar. So this land essentially was or became the birthplace of the Indic civilization. However, what happened is, and no doubt there is a lot of Buddhist culture spread, later, and then Harshvardhan was Raja Harshvardhan ruled from Thanesar before shifting to Kannauj in the Gangetic Plains, and that's an interesting story. Another interesting story that I'm trying to write in my next book, talk about what Raja Harshvardhan was doing before he ended up ruling as the Raja of India from the Gangetic Plains. But right after that phase, you see that there's a lot of Islamic invasion. I'm talking about the 7th, 8th century. Now, the Islamic invaders, in their mad just for power and spread of this jihad, were invaded India from the western part or the northwestern India. So they crossed the Punjab area, and there were two routes to go to Delhi or to enter further into India, which is like if they wanted to get into Gangetic Plains or if they wanted to get into Magad. This region became the bulwark. So there are two routes. One could be from Multan side, one would go from Hisar and come to Delhi, or from the Punjab side, where they'll come from Sirhind and they'll come to Ambala. From Ambala, they'll come to Karnal, Panipat, Sonipat, and ultimately Delhi. And from Delhi, they'll further head out to Agra and so on and so forth. I found well-documented versions, Persian records, where the dry bed of River Saraswati was utilized to run their horses down towards the Indic or the Indian plain, and that is how, and that is when this land of, or the birthplace of Indic civilization became a battleground of civilizations. Because essentially in the medieval era, what happened was Haryana ended up, different regions of Haryana became battlegrounds. You see, Kaithal, Shabad, Ambala, Taraudi, Karnal, Panipat, Sonipat, you've got Hisar, you've got Agroha, Hansi. All these places ended up becoming, there was some battle or some war which was happening here, which essentially led to a lot of turmoil, and there is an empire that could flourish in these lands. And even modern Indian histories is defined by a few of those key battles, and those key battles were fought on this land. For instance, everybody knows what happened in Battle of Tarain, or first Battle of Tarain, and then second Battle of Tarain. Then of course the battle in Panipat, the three battles of Panipat, which are essentially dividing epochs between them. Karnal was a witness to the Iranian, the Persian Nadir Shah fought the battle in Karnal. There are multiple battles happening in Kunchpura. Essentially ended up in this entire medieval age. There were a lot of battles happening and wars happening on these lands, and all these battles were essentially to get more of, or get further down into India and earn more of its riches. And hence, during the course of research, I ended up reading a lot about that phase, ancient and medieval also. However, it was right that since I'm talking about a region called Haryana, where not many people are aware, it was important that I write a very excuse me, a defined timeline of history, and then essentially connect different phases of the Haryanvi history for the reader. And so the book now begins at the second part of Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb's rule, where somewhere close to the 17th century. Why did I choose that? One reason, of course, is that it was in the second half of the 17th century that the Mughal ruler Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb is considered the last great Mughal by historians who've so far written our academic histories, and they considered that Aurangzeb was a great Mughal, and in his time a lot of things happened. So Aurangzeb became a good inflection point, because right after this we see a lot of turmoil happening in this entire region. When I say a lot of turmoil, I do mean I make a mention of what was happening in local rebellions, local revolts. I was trying to make a mention of new powers or new smaller powers that had cropped up and were essentially planning to take over more power or grab more power from the already declining Mughal Empire. So that entire thing was happening in the 17th century. Right after the death of Aurangzeb, you see that there are many regional players which end up becoming so powerful that they are actually challenging the Mughal emperor. So you've got Jats. Jats had started rebelling against Aurangzeb as well. In fact, I recently saw that there's a popular translation of an Italian traveler, Niccolo Manucci's work, which clearly makes a mention of how the Jats in Agra rebelled against Aurangzeb, and they plundered Akbar's tomb. And it was a large, an enraging and a powerful rebellion, wherein religion was an important angle, whereby Jats actually desecrated his tomb, pulled out the bones, and threw them into a fire, essentially bringing what Niccolo Manucci writes, a Hindu end to the great Mughal ruler Akbar. So you see, all of those things were happening in the 17th century. So just like Jats, there were others like Sikhs who had begun becoming powerful. They, by this time of sixth Sikh Guru, they had started to militarize their faith, and in time, this militarized, or this idea of militarization of the faith ended up making more missiles, making jathedars, and essentially making powerful Sikh kingdoms, and the zenith of which was Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who ruled from Lahore. And much like that, you had Gujars. Much like that, you had Marathas in the below in the Deccan area. Excuse me. So you see, all of that was happening, and not just this. Then there were Mughals, there were Rohillas, there were Afghans who were also involved in fighting. So I've covered all of that phase in the first chapter, which is titled Jat Sardars and Nawabs, wherein I talk not just about Jat Sardars, I do talk about princely states and Nawabs who were essentially who made Haryana their home and ruled this entire region. Second chapter is titled Era of Anarchy. Anarchy is the title of a book written by William Dalrymple, but he's also essentially taken it from what I believe, I cannot say it for him. But Sir Jadunath Sarkar also makes a mention of this phase as anarchy multiple times in his work because of a lot of turmoil. Because India at this time had become a home for, a lot of people. They were English, they were French, they were Portuguese, they were who had come in alongside. There were battles. Marathas were trying to move northwards and establish their hegemony or establish their control over Delhi. Of course, there were Mughals. Of course, there were Ulas. Of course, there were Jats in the local region. Of course, there were many others. So it just, this entire phase from 1750s to 1803 is the era of anarchy, not just in India, in Haryana as well. It is in 1803, after the close of the Second Anglo-Maratha War, that the English East India Company gained solid control over Delhi. And the next few years were spent after 1803 were essentially spent in controlling the neighborhood of Delhi, which is Haryana. Haryana borders Delhi on three sides. So next few years were just there were battles, there were conflicts, all headed in a direction where the English wanted to be in a better control of what was happening in the vicinity of Delhi. And they ended up doing that because you see from 1803 to 1857, the English went on multiple conflicts and they were negotiating with different power players across India. And for them, essentially, all of it led to establishing themselves as a solid power in India. And you see that in 1857, it's essentially the Queen that takes it up from the English East India Company. The third chapter is titled The First War. K.C. Yadav is an important historian in the history of Haryana. He's also corresponded with many other prominent historians over all across India and the world. And he makes a mention of that there's a common belief that the first war of independence started in the Meerut cantonment. However, 9 hours before, the sparks or the fire of the rebellion, which became the first war of independence, 1857, started in the Ambala cantonment. Ambala was an important cantonment for the British. It was in Ambala cantonment that the English had established their defenses. Right in the north of Ambala, there was the kingdom of some 100 kilometers northwards. There were the Satluj states, and then there was, of course, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's empire. Maharaja Ranjit Singh's empire essentially had, after his death, had essentially, the Anglo-Sikh wars happened. By 1857, the English were well in control of what was happening in Punjab. They were well in control of what was happening in Satluj area, which is the area between Yamuna and Satluj River. And in Ambala, they had formed and established a strong cantonment for the defenses of the north. There's an important history about the Ambala cantonment also. You see, the cantonment in Ambala was essentially in Karnal. It was established in Karnal. In Karnal, the company had formed good forts. They had established themselves, good army lines, barrack lines, good defenses. They had worked on a lot of civil infrastructure. However, Karnal is very close to the river, and every summer, a lot of people in the entire cantonment would be taken down by fever and cholera. And I tend to say that we take it for granted, but paracetamol ended up saving a lot more lives than we gave it due credit for. So in that phase of time, or a part of history, cholera, fever, plague, all these were genuine and real problems, and the cantonment would be taken down by it. And it was decided in 1840s that the cantonment would be shifted from Karnal further towards north in Ambala. It was in Ambala cantonment that 9 hours before Meerut, writes K.C. Yadav, that the sparks of the 1857 war were lit. And it's an important point. You see, it was also in Ambala cantonment that right before the war, the head of the English East India Company forces, General Anson, was stationed. Anson shifted his base in Shimla during the hot May summer. In fact, wow, I think the 1857 war started on 10th May, and we are on 8th May today delivering this lecture. So General Anson, around this time, in 1857, had shifted northwards in Shimla, and he was sitting in these cool breezy winds and enjoying the cooler weather of Shimla, while in the hot summer in Ambala cantonment, it was just ready to get up in flames. And that is what happened in May 1857. The Ambala cantonment on 10th of May, 9 hours before Meerut, the rebellion began, which ended up bringing on forces together, Indian forces together, to just challenge the English East India Company. I've written about the 1857 war essentially from a Haryana point of view in the book as well. Importantly, to give you an idea about which were the prominent princely states then, which were the prominent families, because it's tough to imagine. For instance, many people know of Mirza Ghalib, but not many people understand the fact that Mirza Ghalib was connected to family in Haryana. Or they were princely states of before India gained independence, who ended up or later in life became presidents and important ministers and parliamentarians, and they carried the legacy of their own princely state. Similarly, there's Dag Delvi, who is another very important name in Urdu poetry, quite if not as much, but probably in the same league as Mirza Ghalib. Dag Delvi also hailed from family in Lohari. Then, of course, there were Pataudi, Saif Ali Khan, Soha Ali Khan, and they come from the Pataudi family. Pataudi essentially, not many people know this, but it's around 100 or less than 100 kilometers from Delhi. You go Gurgaon, and from Gurgaon you take further into the countryside, you get into the Pataudi region, and this is what they control. So of course there are not just this, there are multiple princely states which are important, have played an important key role in the history of Haryana. Then of course, from the fourth chapter is titled Call for Freedom, which is from 1857 to 1947. This is where I essentially try to, I also tell you the story about how the connection of, the conundrum. People tend to think that Delhi is so detached from Haryana, not realizing the fact that Delhi was taken away from the region Haryana in 1911, after 1911, when the Delhi Darbar was held. Land was taken from Haryana region and then essentially made into a big capital. So there's a bit in this chapter which is titled "Oh Delhi, You Are Haryanvi." I think readers will find it quite interesting and quite, they'll enjoy understanding this bit of modern Haryana and modern Indian history. This is also the chapter which tells you about how Haryana and Punjab, how their fortunes got connected. See what happened in 1857. The Sikh states had sided with the English East India Company forces. They had their own political reasons behind it, but as a matter of fact, it was the Sikh states or Sikh states which essentially guarded the GT road or the Grand Trunk Road, which was an essential, for movement of men, material, and resources for the British, who had made their defenses or established their defenses in the northern ridge, which is in the North Campus of Delhi University today. So right after the war, the British did a lot of administrative change, and this region of Haryana was then clubbed with Punjab. And from 1858 then till 1966, Haryana was then connected to Punjab, and it is this connection that people essentially, quote till date, that Haryana is a cousin of Punjab, not realizing the fact that prior to 1857, no, Haryana and Punjab were not connected at all for a large amount of their, large space of their historical timeline as well. Then, of course, there's this fifth chapter is scripting the future, and this chapter essentially talks about how from 1947 to 1966 the changes that happened in Haryana, and how Haryana statehood happened. People tend to believe that there was this Punjab statehood movement where language and religion intertwined to essentially for the formation of or to give rise to the state of Punjab. However, there's a major vacuum in this argument and this discussion, that people don't know that there was a parallel strong movement happening for Haryana as well around that time. And leaders like Professor Sher Singh, Advocate Moolchand, and others were prominent faces behind this movement, driven by the Arya Samaji ideology. They just brought together a lot of people who ended up making a very strong case for a separate state of Haryana, which essentially fructified in 1966. Then from the sixth chapter is Three Lals, which is a lot of political turmoil. Haryana is till date known as the state where of Airam Gairam. Airam Gairam is the epithet for the politics of defection. It was this politics of defection which ended up giving you or bringing an anti-defection law in 1980s. All of that happened in Haryana. Haryana got infamous for that. Haryana also, because now you see, Haryana is neighboring Delhi from three sides, and whoever ruled Delhi had a fair amount of control over what was happening in the neighborhood. So the Gandhi family's fortunes were also very well connected with Haryana. For example, the Maruti project. Sanjay Gandhi was passionate about making the dream car Maruti. He had taken this dream from Volkswagen's, or what Hitler imagined with Volkswagen. He had some small internship and apprenticeship training with the Rolls-Royce, and when he got back to India, his mother was the most powerful politician of the day. And Sanjay Gandhi, with his motley group of a few, people of the day, which Komi Kapoor has written about, and many other people have written about, imagined that he'll make a Maruti car. So that happened. And right after that, that phase where I discuss about Maruti, I discuss about Sanjay Gandhi, I discuss about how during emergency days, Haryana had become a it's a nice word for it, but Haryana jails became home to prominent politicians all across India. So from Pilu Modi to you had Jayaprakash Narayan. So all the prominent politicians in India were, jailed in Haryana, because in Haryana during that time the chief minister was Bansi Lal, and Bansi Lal was in the close coterie of Indira Gandhi, and very thick with Sanjay Gandhi as well, because he was the one who was the chief minister when Sanjay Gandhi got this large amount of land in Manesar to make Maruti. So the land for factory was given at cheap rates to Sanjay Gandhi. Bansi Lal became very close to Sanjay Gandhi, and Bansi Lal ended up becoming very close to Indira Gandhi. And all of this was taken advantage of in 1975 when emergency was happening. And in emergency then, as I said, Haryana jails became home to a lot of politicians across India. The seventh chapter is Chaudhar, where I discuss about modern politics of Haryana. And it is in the eighth chapter where you see the real punch of the book. Book takes a very high pace, because I talk to you about economy, I talk to you about industry, I talk to you about entrepreneurship, the story of sports, I talk about media, I talk about the changing face of women in Haryana. So all those misconceptions, all those modern ideas about Haryana, they're all taking a, I go through a brief, but a very quick analysis and a sound analysis of what the changes that are happening in 21st century Haryana. That's about the book. What I do hope to do in the next, because I'm working on another one which is more on contemporary Haryana. I want to take up topics which are more, um, which have been questioned to me over the last few months. The book was out in November, and I've gotten onto multiple conversations with people across the spectrum to tell about what they like about the book, what are the questions they still want to be addressed about Haryana. For instance, there's a question on the changing face of women in politics, or the story of how sex ratio of Haryana, or the child sex ratio of Haryana is changing, how Haryana became infamous for, well, corruption, red tapeism, and in government jobs. And all of a sudden, you see in the last few years, there's a very positive, significant turnaround. So all those stories I am taking up in the next book. And of course, the great story of how the economic turnaround has happened, how from a poorer cousin, or so to say, the poorer cousin of Punjab, Haryana has actually overtaken it, and it has become a powerful and economic powerhouse in itself. So all those questions I'm taking up in the next book, and I hope to bring it out by the end of the year. That's more or less about Land of the Gods, the story of Haryana. If you have any questions, I'm ready to take it up. Here's the cover of the book. Anybody, whoever's bought the book or would look at the cover, would know that the cover is actually the Bhagavad Gita Sar. Lord Krishna is right, on the chariot, and he's right on the top of the fly. So there's an important signia in this picture is Lord Hanuman. So Hanuman was atop the Rath. अर्जुन का जो रथ था उसके ऊपर जो झंडा था उसमें भगवान हनुमान हुआ करते थे. So it's actually telling of that. So yes, please order the book Land of the Gods, the story of Haryana, and I hope I've not crossed the time limit. Open for questions. Yes.
Okay. Good evening, sir. It was a very nice talk. I have a question regarding geographical location. Like when we talk about ancient Haryana, how we are going to define it geographically? That what was the ancient Haryana limitation, right? And then please throw some light on Markanda River also, because there is a huge debate among the geologists regarding this Ghaggar, Drishadwati and Markanda River. So it will be nice if you will throw some light on this also.
So yes, geographically, in the southernmost part of Haryana are the oldest rocks, one of the oldest mountain chains in the world. The Aravallis are there. Aravallis are denuded folded mountains. Himalayas are the youngest folded mountain chain. The Aravallis are the oldest. Running northwards from there, you see a large phase of a plain, which is plain of land, which is fertile. It's climatically speaking, it's arid to semi-arid, but with adequate water, the soil is fertile, which is again telling of the ancient rivers that used to flow here. This question of Markanda River, the question of the Shadwati, the question of Ghaggar River has, this is a question that many geologists are dealing, and they are dealing accordingly in parallel with what was happening in what is happening at the same time in Indological studies too. So there are geologists of the view who have found many paleo channels and paleo beds in the vicinity of Thanesar or Kurukshetra, and those paleo beds are essentially telling of that once there used to be a very strong river, or a river with a large drainage basin used to flow here. There is one view, of course, where they said that it is the Ghaggar River, which was the Saraswati. Yet there are other views amongst geologists and geological researchers who believe that many smaller rivers and many rain-fed rivers in this region were essentially part of the larger drainage basin of the river Saraswati. So those people argue that Markanda River is again a part of that larger drainage basin. There are, of course, multiple arguments on both sides. However, and that begins another larger and a broader and a bigger conversation on talking about Saraswati. However, this is a certain fact now, based on remote sensing research, based on geological research, based on sedimentological studies, studied in parallel with how literal and indological references for all those things are available. That Saraswati River used to flow from this region, and both sides of the river were essentially prominent centers of learning and civilization. Now, these questions, and the bigger challenge is that whenever anybody tends to take this topic for research or even talks about it, a barrage of counter or opinionated arguments come in, where it is proposed that probably that Saraswati is a BJP or an RSS fantasy. Well, fact of the matter, it is not. And what should trump at the end of the day is science. Give enough funding to research institutions to carry out this broad research and understanding the entire drainage basin of Saraswati River. There's an important Professor A.R. Chaudhary is doing an important work there, and I know Professor S.K. Tandon, K.S. Valdia sir published a very important book in 2016, which essentially addressed the entire problem behind, or the entire geological reasoning behind the river Saraswati. Then there's Professor S.K. Tandon, who's trying to do some. Professor Vimal Singh in Delhi University is also has a vision in his mind. I've had multiple conversations with him to understand the geological or sound geological backing behind this river. So all of that needs to be further developed and studied.
So one more question I have regarding this Haryana's connection with Himachal. Like, we always talk about Delhi, we always talk about Mathura and northwestern part of India, but I feel somewhere we are missing the region of Himalaya, which was very much connected with the Haryana region.
Yes. So wonderfully said. Many a times it happens that people don't realize it. 1966 के अंदर सिर्फ हरियाणा और पंजाब ही डिवाइड नहीं हुआ था, हिमाचल प्रदेश भी डिवाइड हुआ था. एंड मेरे ख्याल से यही इट इज दैट कनेक्शन जिस वजह से लॉट ऑफ हरियाणवीज एट द ड्रॉप ऑफ द हैट, जैसी गर्मी लगती है सब शिमला की तरफ दौड़ के जाते हैं. अनदर थिंग इज कि हरियाणा और पंजाब की जो स्टेट्स, दोनों स्टेट्स की जो कैपिटल है चंडीगढ़, एंड चंडीगढ़ से आप 1 hour you're into Himachal Pradesh, you're into the cool breeze of Himachal Pradesh. Apart from that, Haryana, the fortunes are connected for this entire 120 years or so, or 110 years or so of this history, when Punjab, Himachal and Haryana were connected. Himachal is also the region where, although Himachal has its own different culture, but there's this interrelation, interconnectivity, and this constant to and fro of people, which has happened over the last many years, which of course is an interesting topic of conversation. For instance, there's this place called Peterhof in Shimla. Now, Peterhof in Shimla was the place where Nathuram Godse's trial was held. And Godse was then taken from there to Ambala, where he was hanged to death. So one important, there are many such just connections happening. Yeah.
And so actually it is very interesting because if we talk about Harappan, when this northwestern part of India, like Indus River system, was deserted, we are not getting much sight around this late Harappan period, 1900 BC. But we are getting lots of late Harappan sites, PGW sites in Haryana and Upper Ganga Plain. So now the population was shifting towards this Haryana and then shifting towards the Upper Ganga Plain area, like this Yamuna Nagar and all region. So this
Yes.
region was very much fertile as well as very much important for the pastoral communities because they also need grassland. Uh, so I feel somewhere because during Harappans we don't have this concept of, probably there was this concept of sacred geography because Kalibanga and Rakhigadi, two major important towns, which is situated on the bank of river Saraswati, and the second one is Rakhigadi is situated on Brishabhati. So we should bring this concept of sacred geography during the Harappan period also, because if you geologically, if we talk about the location of Kadibanga and Rakhigadi is very much important for the eastern region of or eastern domain of Harappan civilization. So, do you feel we should bring this concept of sacred geography
Absolutely.
during?
So what is happening is good that you pointed these things out. So see, like I was saying, in Harappan civilization, you see these important sites like Rakhibadi and Kalibanga, along with Banavali and many other sites that were prospering in Haryana region. And these were established on the banks of Saraswati River. There's a set group of geologists and researchers who believe that as soon as river Saraswati, because what you see is in the later part of in the later Vedic history, you see that there's this, even in Purans, there's a mention of how Saraswati is slowly dying and the Vinashana is in its way. And the site of Vinashana is moving, and Vinashana means it's dying or the close or the ending of the river. So soon, and right around that time, what happens is that since the river is drying up, civilization is moving towards the Gangetic plain or the upper Gangetic plain. And this falls in line with what is happening. We found out a chariot in this Bagpat area 2
Sanoli
years
says.
ago. Sanoli say. So Sanoli say it is telling of the fact that civilization was moving from the Saraswati plain towards the Gangetic plain or the upper Gangetic plain. And then as soon as, because a lot of weather and climatic change was underway, the civilization thereon which prospered was then became the Gangetic civilization. And in time you see the Gangetic civilization from there on prospers really well. So what happens is there are researchers who are able to establish this correlation. However, like I said, addressing the Saraswati question is the fact that more needs to be this idea of exploration or this theme and the connection that we're trying to build has to be backed more from geological point of view as well. And this can happen only if science essentially is given the free hand. And very important point of view there.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
So I recently read about the story of Gokul Jat. And then I read a few things about the Jat uprising. And I realized that it is a lot Hindu in nature. It's very dharmic, the Jat uprising. Now, recently, there's been a trend which says that Jats are not Hindu. So I just want you to throw some light on this aspect. How does it come into existence? Where does it come into existence from?
So there are multiple thought processes, and essentially this is what keeps on happening in understanding of our history too. See, there are historians, contemporary historians of that age, which make clear mention of that when Jats rebelled against the Mughal emperor and when they desecrated the tomb in Akbar's tomb in Sikandra, apart from every other angle, the religion was an important angle behind them. And rallying, and one has to be very clear about this, and there's no other way to put it, that rallying of people in that era used to happen on the basis or the foundation of religion. When a Persian entered India, he called it jihad, and he called out for multiple be it Mughals or Afghans, all Muslim by religion, to come together against, even when Abdali came, he wanted to rally people against the Marathas. Marathas sounded the same bugle and wanted that all Hindus to combine. However, it is not very well, it is not documented in a lot of popular history books like that. But this is a fact, and this is well recorded in our history books, that when Abdali was, charging onto India, he called it a religion. So religion was an important way to rally people around, and essentially battles jo ho rahi thi, an important angle was religion. So Jats naturally also did. Point is, what happens is when you start understanding or study Jats and their ethnology. Jats are a tribe and they work by a clanal system. So when you see ethnologically, you try to understand Jats. There are a tribal system and a tribal culture. There are Jats who are Hindus and there are Jats who are also Muslims. The Jats who converted into Muslims are Mullah Jats. Just the same way that there are Muslim Rajputs, and Muslim Rajputs were called Ranghars before, or Muslim Rajputs of Haryana at least were called Ranghars before 1947. So that essentially is the tale. Now, another thing that comes into play is from the 1880s, many of, later in the last century, many Jats became Arya Samajis. And Arya Samaj as a movement became very popular amongst Jats in Haryana. So then there are also other people who do not believe in Arya Samaji thought process, ideals, and the Arya Samaji movement. They made certain arguments against the Jats. So it's a long drawn conversation about, and then there are also people who make a mention that Jats were, Jats defied or were not, or did not believe in the Varnashram system. So all those things do go on, and it's part of the larger debate. But this stays a fact that when Jats rebelled against the Mughals, religion was an important angle. And when Arya Samaj stood there to defend people of the region against conversions, Jats were at the forefront. So those conversations can essentially go on.
Thank you, Arjun ji.